All right, everyone, I think we will make a start. So, a warm welcome to you all today. Thanks to Dr. Beavers for allowing this cast to come to this special event. We appreciate it. Thank you to Mark Openlander and Kate Barker from the Center for Applied Learning and all their hard work in putting an event off like this. This is called the Dean Speakers event, and I'm the Dean of the School of Business, Government and Economics. My name is Ross Stewart. It's really nice to see your faces. We've been online for quite a while, right? So it's really great to be back in person with one of these events. And so one of the missions of our school is to prepare leaders for impact out in society. We call it the word human flourishing. We want you to do well out there. And preparing leaders is such a big part of what we do. And so we like to bring leaders from our community, from our key businesses in the area, and introduce them to you and give you show them to you as exemplars of what good leadership looks like. And so we are thrilled today to welcome Jamila Conley. Thanks, Jamila, for coming. She is at F5 Networks, and she does mergers and acquisitions there. And if you know anything about mergers and acquisitions, it's a really big job. Not just to figure out the numbers, but to figure out cultural fit and all those kinds of interesting things that you get into. And she's overseen almost well over $2 billion of M&A work at F5. And as you know, F5 is an interesting company, and it's developing into software as service kinds of activities and various other activities. Kind of they're still doing some of their old switches that they used to do, very key business, right? It kind of provides the cash flow to get into some of these really interesting new areas that F5 is into it. And Jamila is the leader in that area. She's the actual VP of Business Transformation. Isn't that a great word? And that's literally what she's doing, transforming F5 through some of these interesting acquisitions and trying to understand what their mission is and how they're going to add value and bring value to their customers moving forward. She has been an executive for a very long time. She has a CPA license, which warms the cockles of my heart as a professor of accounting, although I've left that. It's tough to get back into that world initially. Yeah. But you got to know the numbers, right? So that's terrific. And she has an MBA in Management Information Systems, and very much so into security. So she's a certified information security auditor. And that's all good background for her as she takes on this new task at this key role at F5. So she is very interested in all about process management, strategic program management, business process management, enterprise change management, and in her career she's been an auditor, a technology consultant, an IT compliance person over Sarbanes-Oxley, which is a key piece of legislation around internal controls and that kind of thing in business processes, and has been an enterprise IT applications leader. So very interesting background for her current role now. Now outside of the office, she is very involved in our community. She serves on the board. She's board president of the Technology Access Foundation, which is working to bridge the equity gap in education and introduce students of color to STEM. She also serves on the advisory board of the Program Management Certificate at the University of Washington. In addition to her board service, she's very involved. She's an IWF Fellow for Women in Executive Leadership, and she is often a guest speaker at the University of Washington. She's an advocate for women and people of color in technology. And then very interesting background in several topics around DEI issues that she's been involved with, and we might hear some of that today as well. But it's an absolute pleasure, Jamila, to have you on the campus today. We just want to give you a warm welcome. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for that warm welcome, and I'm excited to be in person. This is the first in-person event I've done in 2.5 years, so it's great to see all your smiling faces. And I'm hoping this will be an interactive, event. I know we'll have time for questions at the end, but if you have questions during please, stop me, ask, whatever. So before we jump in and just kind of talking about transformation and thinking about how F5 started, I'm just going to give you a quick little tidbit about F5. So I've been there 10 years. F5 has been around since 1996. And it started as a gaming company. And I'm not a gamer, so I'm going to get this wrong, but I forget what it's called, but like World of Warcraft, the multiplayer games. What they found was it started as a gaming company, but the servers kept crashing because too many people were getting on the server. So the guys that started F5 came up with a solution of like, well, how can we balance the traffic on a server so that the servers don't crash if too many people try to play the game at once? And so they created the load balancing technology, which transformed F5 into the leader of what's called the ADC market, Application Delivery Controller. And F5 sits behind almost any enterprise app, so Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Google, any company in their network. So we have proprietary software that we load onto hardware that we manufacture that sits in data centers. But then from there, we've continued to pivot into application delivery. So when you think about the apps on your phone, every time you're going to Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, they use F5 services to help protect in that delivery of the app and experience that you have. So F5 has really pivoted from being this gaming company to now being a security and app delivery company. So I just wanted to give that little tidbit because you think about transformation, it's very broad and wide and can happen from almost any perspective, planned or unplanned. So definitely unplanned of a gaming company stumbling into a $5 billion valuation company today. So let's get into the presentation. So what is transformation? So when we think about transformation, you'll hear buzzwords like business transformation, digital transformation, and it's just like, oh, this is something that I have to put a lot of thought and focus into, and not that you don't, but anything can transform. It's just transforming from one state to another, whether that be your appearance, your career, who you want to end up being as future leaders as you're preparing to go out into the world. Transformation is really just how do you change? And so one of the things I want to focus on in my presentation today, we'll talk a little bit about business transformation, but I really want to focus on giving you some insight in my career journey, the pivots that I've made through that journey, and how that pivot in my different career journey has pivoted and helped transform me and a lot of the capabilities that I've picked up along the way. And since I know a lot of you are in business school, you're finance majors, I'm an accounting major, and if you would have asked me, or if you would have asked me when I was in college, well, what do you want to be? It's like, well, I want to be a staff accountant, and then I want to be a senior staff accountant, and then I want to be a manager by the time I'm 30, and that was kind of my goal of like, oh, there's this linear path. I would have never said, oh yeah, one day I'm going to be a VP of business transformation. One, the term didn't exist back then, and two, I had no idea that I would have M&A in my background, that I would have program management in my background. So being very cognizant during your journey can take you a lot of places to build who you become as both a person and a leader. So the types of transformation, like I said, you have your career, and your career can encompass and grow and blossom. So never think of your career as a straight line, that I'm a finance person and I just want to be the top of whatever at the company I work at in finance, because you never know. That journey is going to twist and turn. And then, like I said, and as your career changes, depending on where you are and what you're doing, you'll also directly impact business transformation, whether you know it or not, whether you stumble upon it. And one of the things that I'll just talk about just briefly here is part of the reason I'm in the role I'm in today is that I stumbled into our digital transformation at F5. And what I mean by that is I was an IT leader, and I owned our licensing systems, was part of my charter when I was in IT, of how we license our products. And our product teams, they were trying to figure out how to sell subscription, but they were going at it in a way of, well, we can't do it because licensing's broken. And there was a meeting that happened. I wasn't at that meeting. I came back and the CIO was like, hey, product team says licensing is broken. You need to fix it. I'm like, licensing isn't broken. What are you talking about? We have a $2 billion revenue business. And I was like, no, licensing isn't broken. We just don't have a subscription business model. We have a perpetual business model, which is very different from a recurring revenue model. And what I had to do, and like I said, I didn't look at this as transformation. No one in the company was looking at it as transformation. Is me and one of the product leaders, we started having meetings with the executive team on educating them on the fact that we don't have a subscription business model. We need to look at our strategy. We need to figure out, do we want to have a hybrid strategy? Where are we going? How are we going to do it? Which then led to us bringing McKinsey in-house to do a strategy, a strategy assessment to help us figure out what's the market, where do we want to play, what's the opportunity, and then from there, McKinsey helping us focus on, here's the areas you need to focus if you really want to pivot to subscription and how much you should pivot to subscription. And again, this was all from me just saying, we don't have the right business model in place. And then that became, okay, well, let's start focusing there. We didn't get it right the first few times because we over pivoted on, well, if we fix the systems, that will transform us. And that wasn't the case at all. It's like, one, it's both the mindset as well as understanding your customer journey, as well as understanding what do you need to change in your operational processes. And so it's taken us a few cycles, but that's an area where just applying some curiosity and educating, that's how we started our digital transformation journey. And that started back in 2016. So just from some of my career pivots, I was able to help be part of what changed the mindset of how do we start looking at business transformation. So then the last transformation is personal, is that you take these lived and gathered experiences, and that's going to continue to transform you, both personally of who you are, what's your value, as well as how you grow and what type of leader you end up being. So we'll talk a little bit about the career transformation journey, in which, from everything I've already said, as you can see, is transformation starts early. And it doesn't necessarily start when you start your job, but and like I also said, your career journey is often very unpredictable, and you're going to have to be open to when is life presenting me a pivot, and is this a learning opportunity that can help me grow? So I'll talk a little bit about my journey. Like I said, my undergrad is in accounting. I thought I just wanted to be an accountant, and I got my CPA license. And then this was right around the time, all you kids probably weren't born then, but it was around the time when the internet was exploding and all these startups were happening. It was the late 90s. And as I was, I got out of school, started working, and decided to get my MBA in the evenings. And I'm looking at people next to me getting these computer science degrees, and I'm like, I want some of that. This seems so exciting. So I decided to focus my MBA on management information systems. And I figured that I don't want to be a developer. I knew that. And I knew that I wanted to be connected to strategy, and that the world was continuing to um, outpace what we were thinking with technology and the internet and what is this going to look like. So I got my graduate degree in management information systems. Unfortunately, I graduated in 2000 when the bubble bust, the internet bubble bust, and I was like, well, what do I do now? And so I worked for 6 years as an auditor, doing public accounting. I traveled a lot. I learned a lot about a lot of different companies and got a lot of exposure, but you're always kind of shoved in a closet. It's like the auditors are here, you guys do your thing and go away. And it was fun, but it wasn't enough. I knew that I wanted more. And so I left accounting to then go and be a consultant and do technology consulting. And really, this is where I started to learn more about business processes, how businesses think, what are their strategies, how are they using tooling to solve solutions. So I helped several companies select systems to support their business. And it gave me a great wide range of how companies work. But then what I felt like I was missing was, you're always at the 10,000 foot level as a consultant. You're never deep into an area or space or company to really have that impact. So after about 4 years of consulting, I decided I want to get some industry experience and what looks appealing to me. And I knew I wanted to be in tech. I wasn't sure what that looked like. And I ended up over at T-Mobile. And when I went over to T-Mobile, before I became an IT professional, I went over as a manager to help stand up, because I was also doing, in my consulting world, I was also doing IT audits around SOX and SOX compliance. And so T-Mobile, because it was an international company, they didn't need to be SOX compliant yet, so I helped them stand up their compliance department, specifically around IT SOX controls, and preparing them for IT SOX and learning their control structure. And it was a great experience. And once we had that all stood up, I figured, like, okay, I want to do something different. But what does different look like? And one of the key things that I want to tell you here is, one of the things that's always helped me in my career is being open and finding people who are willing to listen and help you navigate your career journey. So at the time, when I was at T-Mobile, I went to the VP of my department. I was a manager, and I told him, you know, I feel like I've done what I can do in this role. I like the role, but I want to get even closer to IT, but I don't want to lose my accounting background. And they were standing up what was called the business management office in the IT department. He was like, hey, there's this new group that's being stood up, and basically your liaison between the IT professionals and the business professionals to understand what is it the business is trying to solve, and then helping to drive from an IT perspective, how do we deliver from an IT perspective. And it was great because I knew nothing about this. This is business analysis. And I went over into IT, and that was my foray into IT, was managing a team of business analysts. It was interesting because during that same time, I also looked at other jobs in T-Mobile, and one was with our project management team. And I used to think, I can't do project management. This seems too hard, too obscure. I don't know what I'm doing. And making that pivot to the business analyst team is really what has gotten me to understand how to do broad program management, even though I've never been a program manager, because I was able to truly understand what's the business need when we talk about technology, and then how do we solve for that, working across technical teams to be able to translate what the business wants into into technical language. And during this part of my career at T-Mobile, I learned so much broadly, although I was supporting finance and accounting at the time. And then when I left T-Mobile to go over to F5, and F5 was a much smaller company at the time, but they needed someone to set up business analysis for the entire enterprise. And at first I was like, I've only been supporting finance and accounting, but I know how to do business analysis. I know the structure that has worked. And so I was able to set up enterprise business analysis at F5. And then from there, I was working really closely with the person who was hired about 6 months before me to stand up the project management office. And we built all of the processes of how do you build a strong program management office. And that's where I learned that skill. And again, not necessarily formal training, but knowing how do you put components together. And through through those 10 years as an IT professional, I would have, and as I continue to prove like, oh, wow, you can build something, you can get it operational, I would get challenges that kept coming my way of, hey, we need to do something different. And one example of this would be like learning management. We didn't have learning management at F5. And it was a struggle for the business. And I worked closely with the business team that was trying to stand this up of like, okay, how do we bring people together? What does this look like to put learning management in place? The same with master data management, the same with master data management and business process management. So one of the things I say here is that even if you don't have the skill set now, you should see things as learning opportunities and think about what's inside of your current skills and what's the opportunity to learn, and use that as your opportunity to continue to grow yourself. I could have said no to a lot of these opportunities because I hadn't done it in the past, and that's something I call living in a past-based future. And if you always live in a past-based future, then you're always limiting yourself to the art of the possible and what's actually out there for you. So when you're presented with opportunities, yes, look at your skill set, but also look at it as, but what's on the other side if I say yes? What if I get this right? And actually something I tell people a lot, especially people that I mentor and sponsor, is, and what if you fail? You still learn something. So don't think about it, because sometimes we get so scared of the fact that of what we don't know that we limit ourselves the opportunity to grow. That even if you failed, you still learned something. And then you can still build upon that. So those 10 years as an IT professional were very pivotal, and even more pivotal because for where I am today, how I got there, it wasn't, again, that I went out and studied M&A, studied business transformation. What happened there was the fact that we had a new CEO come in. He wanted to build M&A into our strategy. We didn't have an M&A function. He hired a chief strategy officer to be responsible for this function and standing up a corporate strategy function at F5. And he and I had a conversation. And again, just kind of being open and talking to people. I just went and talked to him. His name's Tom. And I went and talked to Tom, and I said, hey, Tom, you had talked about this thing called IMO. What is that? And he was like, oh, the integration management office. It's the integration piece of when we buy companies. He was like, I need someone who can run a good program and help me stand this up. And he told me his vision. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was like, I know some people that you should talk to. And again, I wasn't even really thinking about myself. I'll admit I was kind of being in a past-based future of like, I don't know anything about M&A, not me, but here's some people you can talk to. And a couple of months went by, he and I talked again, and he was like, well, would you consider it? I was like, what, me? And he's like, yeah, I've been really impressed when I've seen you in meetings, and I think that, this is something that will come naturally to you. And I was terrified, but I also knew I wanted to do something differently because I had been in IT now for 10 years, and I hadn't been on the true business side of working in industry. So again, I assessed, well, what's the learning opportunity? Oh, this is something new I'd be able to put on my resume. I'll learn, I'll grow. And I was terrified, but what I did is I turned that terror into, okay, how can I learn as much as I can? And thankfully, we did not have an acquisition within like the first 4 months of me taking this role, but I reached out to industry professionals. I reached out to peers, my consultant peers in the industry of like anyone who knew M&A, I talked to them. And I started building the methodology of how we wanted to execute on that, on M&A integrations. And it was wildly successful. It was more successful than anybody thought, me, everyone, but it was more because we had a very sound methodology that was easy to follow, and we were able to bring everyone along. I did a gap analysis of meeting with people who had been involved with some of our failed integrations to ask like what was missing to make sure that I didn't miss those roadblocks. And how I ended up in business transformation was as we were doing these integrations, I started seeing areas where this is great, we've bought this company, it matches to our strategy, but internally, we don't have a way to connect the dots. So we were basically buying companies and ending up with 5 different sales motions, 4 different ways that people were calling into customer support, just as a couple of examples. And I started talking to the exec team of, hey, I see this gap, like there's no one to actually lead this. And that's how my charter ended up getting extended into business transformation. And that's a lot of what my team leads now is like, how do we bring a lot of this disparate stuff together so that we can actually scale and operationalize? So I say all of that, and you've already kind of heard me talk about it, but when you're in a transformative state, you're in a transformative state now just by being college students and you're learning, but mindset matters. Making sure that like, what are you focused on? Are you focused on the learning opportunity? And this is going to be really important when you're out in the world versus being super focused on, I have an accounting degree, so I can only be an accountant, versus I went to college and I learned a lot of stuff there that I can apply and let me see what can I lean into, which then will allow you, if you have more of what's called a growth mindset, you'll start to embrace more challenges and you'll really start continuing to develop your skills that will drive outcomes both for the companies that you work with as well as for you personally, versus a fixed mindset. You really hold on to where's my comfort zone. So when I talk about a future-based future versus a past-based future, that past-based future is really leaning back into your comfort zone of what you know, where a future-based future is like leaning into that opportunity to learn and to grow. So from everything that I talked about, I'll just talk about like, I've kind of taken you through this, so a lot of this won't be any surprise that starting with an accounting degree, I had an accounting capability that then lent itself to a business process capability, to a business analysis capability. And as I started growing in my career, I started getting more opportunities to speak and people asking about, hey, can you come and talk to us? Can you tell me more about your journey? Which has grown into its own little capability for me. And what you heard earlier, I'm a board president. Again, something I didn't think that 8 years ago, aging myself, I didn't even know how to get on a board. And to be a board president, and I have people asking like, can you be on this board? And a lot of it is because of the capabilities that I've grown along the way. I'm now a guest lecturer at the UW, as you heard. I do a lot of D&I advisory. So as you can see, I do program management, change management, M&A. But as you can see, a lot of these things I didn't have formal training in. It all just kind of came as I continued to just lean in to what's possible. And so I just want you to think about that how your capabilities can grow and continue to transform as you move through your lives and your careers. And a lot of this happens too by building a strong network, by finding those people who are willing to help you navigate the world, who are willing to help you navigate and support you through your career. So having strong mentors, and then sponsors, having sponsors who's willing to open a door for you and give you a chance. So finding those people who will be your support system. So I'm going to pivot just a little bit to transformation in the business context. So in a business context with transformation, one of the key things, and I'll talk a little bit about change, I'll talk a little bit about culture, is in the business context, successful transformation, one requires understanding where is the business or your stakeholders or the people that you have to engage with on the journey of the transformation. And this is really key because one of the things I found early on when I was talking about backing into the digital transformation journey at F5 is that our business partners, they weren't ready. Our stakeholders, they weren't ready for the transformation. So it was met with a lot of resistance. And if I knew what I know now, I would have dealt with it differently. Because if people are ready, and this really speaks to change management, that you really need to figure out, like, who are your people who are going to be advocates for the change and to help make things easier, where, you know, and if those advocates can be influencers to people who are resistors, and also helping you prioritize where do we start and how do we start. So back in 2016, 2017, we tried to like bite off as much as we could all at once, but 9 out of 10 people were resistors. And so it just caused a lot of churn and spin. So one of the things in my role today in business transformation, I have people who they're ready to make a change. They don't know how to make that change. And sometimes my role is advisor of helping them walk through the journey of what could this look like. I have other people that they're told to make a change, but they don't want to make a change. And that's where, and I won't even be an advisor. What I will do is then I figure out, okay, who's asking for this? Who are the influencers? How do we get this person on the same page before I try to engage with them? And then you have people that they're just not really ready to make the change at all. And that's okay too. And it's just like, and that means like, I'll deprioritize that until we get to a point that we can and figure out how do we continue leading them on the journey to get them ready. But it is really critical to understand, is the business, are the stakeholders ready for the change, and what type of change management do you need to apply to bring them on that change? 2, a successful transformation, and I've talked about this before, is having a clear definition of what's your end state, what's the future. And I think that that's a learning that back in 2016, 2017, we knew we were trying to change our business to be subscription, but that was all we knew. We did not have a good defined vision and future to step people into, to give them the components so that they could see that future, feel that future, and really kind of break it down into bite-sized nuggets. And one of the things that we've done to pivot that, inside of F5, we have what we call strategic promises. We have 6 of them, and they're around 6 very specific areas. And we have specific owners of each of those promises. And then what are we trying to deliver over the next 2 years to deliver that promise? And then where do different functions fit in? So having that future-based, having those promises sets the context for the future and what we're trying to do, and people can see how do they fit into that context, so that then they can lean into actually making it a reality. And they see everyone needs to be involved. The other part of transformation to be successful is thought leadership. So one of the things that I'd say here is that when you think of yourselves as leaders, and when you go out into the world and you start your careers, coming with your perspective, and I'm going to say that this is very important no matter what your job, no matter what you do, is that you all have a perspective to bring to the table, and a perspective that matters. And it doesn't matter that you don't have experience or you have limited knowledge. That's okay. Be curious. Bring your perspective, bring thought leadership. I have a young lady on my team that she was an intern with me back in 2019. She started in the pandemic full time. And she doesn't even realize how much thought leadership she brings. And sometimes she falls back into the comfort zone of, oh, I don't know that much. I'm the youngest person in the room. I'm just like, but you bring great ideas to the table. And that helps change hearts and minds. And it's just like, so never think like, oh, I have the least experience in the room. I shouldn't say anything, because it's your thinking, your experience, especially as young people, that you bring that to the table. That helps transformation, because you're bringing a context that maybe everyone hasn't thought about, because all the same old people have been in the room together, that is like they need that fresh perspective. So don't be afraid to use your voice, because that will help transform no matter, like I said, what field that you end up going into. The next thing is operational excellence. And I have this on here because from a business context, and again, a learning from my experience in 2016, 2017, is I said, F5, we over pivoted on looking at systems, but not understanding our operations and how those need to change. So when you're trying to transform a business, you have to think about what's the impact on the operations? Because if you haven't optimize and transform your operations, you can have all the other components, but if nothing works well together, you're just creating friction. So maintaining operational excellence, having that as a forefront, how is this going to impact our processes? How is this going to impact how our customers work with us? Like if you're not thinking from a customer lens back, then you're not creating operational excellence, and that's very, very key in transformation inside of a business context. And then the last two, I'll kind of bucket together, is you have to be willing to pivot when you're trying to apply business transformation, when you're trying to change something, that you can't be fixed in we have to go straight, because sometimes you're going to have to go left and then pivot right really quickly, and vice versa, which means sometimes you also have to think ahead and be proactive and not wait to see what comes along, but you have to bring that proactivity. So just wrapping up here today, when it comes to transformation, as we've talked about, apply a growth mindset with every opportunity that comes to you. Lean into that future state. Be proactive. Think about what's the next question, what's the next thing we should be thinking about, which brings thought leadership, and bring your voice to the table and bring your perspective. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions. Yes.
So I really like what you have to say about having a growth mindset, but I feel like as a woman, it's failure feels so much more the stakes are higher. So how did you navigate that?
So yes, the stakes are higher, and how I've personally navigated that, it goes back to the thought leadership. So, and I'd say, especially as a Black woman in tech and a highly white male field, and I'll just be completely honest with you, is that I am constantly trying to think 10 steps ahead. I am constantly trying to think, what are the questions that I'm going to get people will want answers to, or what are the things that they think aren't going to work, and already having answers to that. So I know it just seems like a small word on a slide, but I can't tell you how much, as a woman in tech, the more proactive you can be, the more of what I call a forward thinker. So that, and what it does is it gets people comfortable with starting to just trust you, and starting to know oh, I asked that question, there's already an answer. I know you already got it. And it's just like, and then people leave you alone. So I constantly go in with the mindset of like, how do I create value? How do I prove that value? And then you'll leave me alone. And it's like, so. There was another question. I'll go to you and then you.
On one of your skills, you said that you had like D&I advisory or something like that. Can you explain what that is?
So diversity and inclusion, and it's a passion point for me. Like I said, I am being a woman and a Black woman in tech. I walked into an environment where I felt like a fish out of water. And it's something that I don't want anyone to ever feel. And for all of my lived experience, that I've taken those experiences and what I personally try to apply is like, how do I build the most diverse teams? How do I support people? How can I be a mentor and open for them? And just by doing that organically, people started to notice, and then people started asking me like, hey, can you come and speak here on this diversity board? Or can you tell us more about what you're doing to build inclusive teams and to make people, one, not just feel welcome and like they belong, but from a diversity perspective, I know that we always think about diversity in terms of gender and race and ethnicity, but from a business perspective, it's really important because having diverse perspectives in the room and making people comfortable to bring their voice to the table, it's what drives change, which can also drive revenues and building better products and products that more people will want. And that's the part that a lot of people miss, that when you talk about diversity and inclusion, yes, it starts with if you're a woman or, if you're a person of color, but that's not where it ends. And there's a much bigger payoff when D&I is thought about in the right way. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, you've already started responding to that question, but as a Black woman, how do you think being a Black woman has impacted your journey, both positively and negatively?
It's a great question. I think positively, it has impacted my journey in some ways because when you're the only, in a lot of situations, there's a lot of spotlight put on you. And which, when you're proactive and you're thinking ahead, it also puts you in a position where people will notice you more, throughout the crowd. And so in that way, I think it's helped me a lot gain sponsors, gain respect, and be able to navigate my career. But I also had to do my own understanding who are my mentors, who are the people I can trust and talk to be supported when I didn't have, when I felt like I didn't have that support. So I feel like that was the positive impact. But I will say that positive doesn't always come easily because for every positive, there's probably 2 negatives that I've been in a room and I've felt overlooked. I felt that, and it took me a while to build my own courage too, of bringing my value to the table, of whether it was being talked over or someone else saying something that I just said, and it took a while. That it's just like, it made me kind of close down, and then kind of overcoming that and now being the person that whenever someone does that, I am that person that's like, thanks, Nick, for saying that. I just said that. Thanks for repeating what I just said. So it's just like you do deal with more microaggressions, and you do, it's like you see them show up, and every day you're making a decision of, is this the battle I want to fight today? Is it going to make a huge impact or not? And, there's a lot of things that, unfortunately, you have to let roll off of you. But when it matters, and if those microaggressions are big enough that they need to be dealt with, that's where you figure out, how do I find my courage? How do I find my support system? Who are the people I go and talk to? And how do I get them to listen? To figure out, how do I navigate and get out of this without doing it by myself? Yes.
Yeah, what's the most difficult situation or something that had to change within your environment that you ever had to deal with?
In what kind of context are you thinking?
Probably having to do with business and the difficult decision being made.
Yeah. So I think the example that I was, there's a lot of them, so I'm just trying to think of think of one good one. But no, so I said that when we were doing this, and we're still on our digital transformation, business transformation journey, and when we started in 2016, 2017, there's the over pivot on IT systems, and that project kind of went through a series of different owners. And I now own it again. And last year, it came to me of like, hey, we're not making traction. It's gone through several different names. But it was one of those that back in 2017, I was in an exec meeting and telling the execs that, hey, we're not focusing on the right things. We're not focusing on, and I don't want to get too technical, but like our product models, our pricing, and like all the structural things that need to change for us to be a subscription business, and I wasn't being heard. And they kept trying to push from a technology perspective. And last year, the exec sponsor of that effort, she came to me of like, hey, I think your team needs to help run this, like we're not getting traction. And I knew, okay, I have to change, their minds on how this is being run. And again, using the being proactive and thought leadership and thinking ahead, I couldn't just go in and say, well, we have to put a process focus and understand the business operations. Instead, what I did to drive that decision was I said, let me do an independent assessment of all the people I think needs to be involved in this effort. I did an assessment, I got all the feedback, and I was able to bring back, here's everything that's not going right that people who should be engaged told us. And that was it. And I was able to open their eyes of like, oh, none of that's being done. And then once I did that, they were then in a place of like, well, how should we be approaching that? And then I was able to give, here's my approach of how we change this. And then those same executives that it would have been a very hard decision, they went off and said, well, let us go back, have some discussions, come back with what are the objectives we want to focus on. They went back, did that, came back of, hey, we have aligned on these 3 objectives and outcomes that we want from this. And now we're running the project, we're making progress, we're delivering, but making that type of decision, and the reason I'm walking through this process is that making a hard decision isn't always, let me ask you a question and you respond. Getting a hard decision made sometimes takes time, and you need to think through the process of what are the hard questions, what are the things that people are blocked on, and how do I help open their eyes to the blockage so that then they can be open to the decision that needs to be made on how we pivot and change things. So, and that's really key, and that's where I said, things I know now, I would have done completely differently, because before, back in 2017, I was just trying to go with, hey, we need to focus on this thing, can we do it? And I wasn't getting the answer I needed, because I wasn't walking them to the decision of the right approach. Yes, and we have time for like, okay.
What would you say are the 2 to 3 core aspects of thought leadership?
2 to 3 core aspects. 1, being curious. 2, not being afraid to share your perspective. And 3, I would say, is taking the time to truly understand the problem. So what's the analysis? What are we trying, what do we need to solve for? And so I guess I would say those almost in a different order of what do we need to solve for? What are we trying to do? And then once you know that, then being curious of like, what other questions could do I need to ask? What aren't I getting? And then forming your own perspective and bringing that back to the table. And if I have to say one thing that is a big pet peeve for me is when people aren't bringing thought leadership, when it's, well, X told me this, so that's what I put on the page. And it's like, okay, that's great, but what are we trying to solve for? What are your thoughts? How do we get there? Don't tell me what other people said. What do you think? What's coming out of your brain?
I'm curious, talking about business transformation, when does a business know it needs to make a major transformation? Because I'm thinking about this multi-year process you're going through, like, I'm thinking about Netflix's report that they lost $2 billion or whatever. Like, that seems like it's too late. Like, you need to know before that the business needs to change its model.
You know, that's a great question, Mark. And it's one of those that sometimes I don't think businesses know. Or they're not paying attention to the waves, or what's the next wave coming, and are you still relevant? And I think, and I know I'm not answering your complete question, but part of the issue, and if you think about like Blockbuster, since you brought up Netflix, is that a lot of companies get stuck in what am I doing well today? So thinking about that past-based future of, hey, I'm Blockbuster, we are #1 in the video market. I don't care what these little, Netflix and streaming services, no one wants that. And if you're not looking at what's the next wave coming, what am I missing? And how do I transform? You're going to miss that. So, and I feel like a lot of companies do that. And to be quite honest, I feel like if our CEO didn't give us the direction that we needed to go on and started pivoting us fast, I'm not sure we would be where we are today. Well, I know we wouldn't be where we are today because we wouldn't have had the discipline and focus, because it's like we've been great at being the leader in the ADC space, but we weren't paying enough attention of like, how do we move faster into subscription? And so I think companies need to always assess what are your competitors doing? And even if it seems a bit off the wall from your core product or your core service, how do you lean into that space and just feel what does it look like if we were actually over here, and how do we apply a strategy? And I feel a lot of companies don't do that enough.
Well, for the subscription business you worked on, what was it exactly, and what was like probably one big change that helped improve the business model?
So there's a couple of things. Is one, our legacy business has been hardware, as I was explaining earlier, has been hardware and data centers, and we needed to start shifting workloads to the cloud so that companies like Netflix and these smaller companies, and not that Netflix is small now, but back then, that they wanted to be able to utilize our products in a way that they didn't have to buy hardware boxes, because a lot of these companies are purely virtual, and they still needed the security, and they needed web application firewalls, and it's like they needed the technology, but they didn't need it in a box or a structure. So one of the big things that we've worked on, and this is where a lot of our acquisitions come into play, of being able to buy companies that are more born in the cloud, subscription-born businesses that have some of that technology, while we were also working on our own technology to be able to provide to those customers. That has helped us pivot faster as we've been moving forward into a more digital world. Any other questions?
We have time for one or two more.
It's kind of like spontaneous. It came up since you were talking about cloud. So like, how does your company, or how do you personally feel about Meta, like Facebook, or even Tesla, I guess?
So personally, You know, it's one of those that I feel that I'm a little bit conflicted on. So it's amazing what technology is able to deliver, and look, and specifically when you brought up Tesla and what Elon Musk, how he's been able to disrupt the car industry and help us pivot faster to electric vehicles. So again, talking about Mark's question is, that's a great example of where you had car companies that we've been talking about electric cars forever, but it was just like, again, why would I cannibalize my bread and butter gas business for this electric car business? And Elon has come in and really disrupted that market. And you see a lot of car makers now trying to catch up to that market. So in that way, I think it's amazing. Where I'm conflicted on it is Elon Musk isn't a car manufacturer. And while he's built this amazing car, there's still a lot of standards. The technology sometimes isn't always great. The security isn't always there. And this isn't about Tesla. This is just about the world. And so I get conflicted on sometimes technology moving faster than we can secure it and feel completely safe. So while he's done, you know, incredible work, there's still, you know, the instances out there of self-driving car, you know, it's like people in autopilot mode and the car crashes, or, you know, it just kind of breaks down in the middle of the highway because of a software update. And so it's like, and that's where I get conflicted, because I think, you know, technology is amazing, but we need to always make sure that we have the right guardrails and balance the protocols of the things that the automobile industry exists for a reason, and people have been building cars. They know a lot of the intricacies that a technologist may not. And so that's where my conflict comes in, of like, how do you balance some of the old and the new to make sure that you're creating a safe and sustainable product?
Well, there are no last questions. I want to thank Jamila again for being here. I really appreciate your time today. We have a small gift on behalf of the school.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. It was great meeting you.